So last week while I was making my previous video, I was going over the OIC regulations again when this happened. It says that anywhere in the regulations where a firearm... What exactly does it say? Oh no. Actually, now that I read that, that actually doesn't mean what I thought it means. Interesting. Maybe we can't then. Huh, that's sad. That is not what that means then. Damn! Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about a mistake I made regarding the 2020 OICs, specifically the ability to reverse them. I've said a number of times on this channel that once the Conservatives get into power, they're just going to undo all of these OICs, you know, the AR-15 bans and so on. Just going to undo them, they're going to OIC everything back to where they belonged, and that'll be the end of it. It'll be a nice, easy fix. And I no longer believe that to be the case. Now, I've been clear from the start of this channel, and there's a disclaimer at the beginning of every single one of my videos. I'm not a lawyer. I have no legal background of any kind, but I wasn't exactly just saying that out of hand either. I did have some pretty concrete reasons for why I was saying what I did. I did do my research. I was reading off the law books. This information came directly from Section 84 of the Criminal Code of Canada and quoted directly from the definitions in there. So it's not like I was just saying these things out of hand. However, in the last couple of months, I've been going over quite a few legal cases, legal documents, reading a lot more laws and studying up on just a wide variety of things and learning more about legal jargon and so on. You'll see it when I get to this point in the video, but there's one particular word in here that really, when I was reading it in my last video, after having months of context on legalese, so to speak, I'm no longer confident about the exact meaning of this. And even with this revelation, I actually can't be entirely sure that my new interpretation is correct. So I'm just gonna tell you what I originally thought and why I've changed my mind. I'm gonna lay it all out for you guys and let you decide for yourself exactly what you think. Again, I do want to apologize for kind of spreading some misinformation in the last couple months. One of the reasons I started this channel, one of the main reasons, is I really did want to combat a lot of the misinformation that was out there, especially regarding firearms. And now I've kind of contributed to some of it. So this is my video trying to correct that, and hope you guys can forgive me. And I'll try to make a point of being more careful about this stuff in the future. So, sorry, but we're going to move on. To sort of really see where I went wrong on this, it comes down to three separate points. One, it comes down to Bill C-71, not Bill C-21, but actually Bill C-71, their previous gun control bill. Two, comes to some actual weird wording, some I think slightly misleading wording, which is actually kind of why I'm still not entirely sure that my new interpretation of this is correct, is because of what this says, and I'll show you when we get there. And then three, we actually have to take a look back at Amendment G46, which was an amendment that was dropped from Bill C-21 during the committee process. But something they always said about G46 was that the reason they needed to put that in law was to block out, or to make it significantly more difficult for Conservatives to just easily reverse the OIC lists at any given point in the future. If they get in, they wanted to have G46 baked into the law, into legal definition, so that it required legislation to overrule. So those are the three things. So first up, we have some changes regarding Bill C-71 that came into effect with the passing of C-21. Now, if you guys remember, Bill C-71 was actually passed in 2019, but they had some provisions in there that were sort of like landmines. They laid them out such that at some point in the future, they could implement them through an order in council. And that's not unusual. Tons of laws do that. C-21, most of the bill was written to come into force through an order in council. Tons of bills do this. This isn't exactly an unusual thing. But that was almost 5 years ago now. That is a pretty long time for them to wait on that. And to be clear, I was actually aware of these changes back when they were made, back when C-21 was passed. The Liberal government has been alluding that there is going to be this OIC lockout all throughout the C-21 process and all throughout the first reading, second reading, so on. It's been in a number of their publications. They've said very clearly that they were going to eliminate the ability to downgrade firearm classifications through OICs, and that was done through Bill C-71, and that just came into effect alongside C-21. So I knew this was always going to be a thing. I just misunderstood exactly how it was going to work. So if we take a look at section 117.15 here in the Criminal Code, this is actually the section of the law that gives the government the ability to OIC firearm classifications. And as you can see here at the bottom, sections 3 and 4 were repealed. This is what it actually looked like before it passed. This is from the archive. So sections 3 and section 4 are what they removed here. So what these two particular provisions did is it allowed anything that was on the prohibited list to be downgraded to either a restricted firearm or a non-restricted firearm, even if it met the criteria of a prohibited firearm. So these changes to C-71 came into force, and they basically just removed those powers. So you can no longer downgrade the classification of firearms through OIC. But I was aware of this before making a lot of these video content, so what exactly changed? So what actually changed was my interpretation or my understanding of the three firearms classifications: your non-restricted, your restricted, and your prohibited definitions. If we take a look at the criminal code and look at these definitions, if we take, for example, the restricted firearm definition, it means all of these things. This doesn't exist in the non-restricted definition, but in the restricted and prohibited definitions, you have a clause which says any firearm of any other kind that is prescribed to be a restricted firearm, which means you can OIC or prescribe things through the powers outlined in section 117.15 that I just showed you. You can just prescribe things to be a restricted firearm or just prescribe things to be a prohibited firearm. So the way I initially thought this was going to work was anything that was a prohibited firearm could be redeclared or represcribed or OIC'd back down to a restricted firearm, because there is still the clause in section D that says any other kind of firearm could be prescribed as a restricted firearm. And that might still be the case. That might be how it works. However, there's one problematic word in there, and that is this word: other. Any other kind of firearm. Now, what I originally thought that meant was just a restricted firearm is all of these things, or anything else you want it to be, is how I originally thought it, and that is kind of how it reads. However, when you take a look at the prohibited firearm definition and the prescription clause that's there, the word other doesn't appear. It says just any firearm that is prescribed to be a prohibited firearm is a prohibited firearm. And back 3-4 months ago, when I kind of started making videos for this channel, that was a difference I didn't really understand fully. The difference of that one single word, how big of a difference that makes. But over the last several months, I've been looking at so many legal documents and court cases and sort of becoming acquainted with a lot of legal terminology. And not necessarily just, fancy words, but how a lot of really mundane or innocuous words just have totally different meanings when you put them down on paper and you write them into law. And in this case, the word other is one of those words. So if you start from the perspective of prohibited firearm, it says any firearm that is prescribed to be a prohibited firearm just is a prohibited firearm. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Any firearm. Very easy. There's no ambiguity, there's no limitations on that. It's just any firearm they want can be prescribed to be a prohibited firearm. So with that context in mind, when you look again at the restricted firearm definition, with the prescription powers in the restricted firearm definition, the way that this reads kind of comes across differently. Now it says a firearm of any other kind that is prescribed to be a restricted firearm, which means it's probably a firearm that is other than the firearms that are described in the previous sections of this definition. And of the other sections in this definition, one of the requirements is that it can't be a prohibited firearm, which is unfortunate because all of the firearms on the OIC list, even though they've only been prescribed as a prohibited firearm, they don't actually meet the technical definitions of prohibited firearms. When you take a look at the prohibited firearms definition, a prohibited firearm is any firearm that's been prescribed to be a prohibited firearm. So at least in the law, there is no difference between a firearm that actually meets the technical definition of a prohibited firearm and a firearm that is just simply prescribed to be a prohibited firearm. They are still they are equally prohibited, even though one is there for a technical reason and one is there for a political reason. I mean a safety reason. Jokes aside, that basically means they're locked there. They are prohibited firearms, as true as any firearm is a prohibited firearm, which means the powers that I thought existed in the restricted firearms definition, section D, they don't have the power to pull something out of a prohibited list down into a restricted list, which is what I thought they could do. But it's because I didn't look at these two things in context of each other. I kind of just looked at the definitions separately, and that was a bad reading on my part, and that was a bad interpretation on my part. Now, like I say, I might still be wrong about that new interpretation. This might still just be any other firearm that they want. Like, I don't think that's how it is. I'm pretty sure that's not correct. But that's why I'm putting it out in front of you. I'll let you decide what you think of what I've just kind of presented. But that's my new understanding. Which, that basically means that the 2020 OIC list is enshrined into the law. Because in order to regain the OIC powers that you would need in order to OIC these things back, you would need to introduce new legislation in order to regain those powers, since those powers have been locked behind legislation thanks to Bill C-71. Now, what's interesting about that is if you remember back in G46, they said that the reason they needed to enshrine this list and all the new firearms and actually a lot of the hunting firearms that were on the G46 list, the reason they needed to put that into law was to make it more difficult to bring those things back into circulation. However, if my new interpretation of all the stuff is correct, it's already behind legislation. Like I say, the only way to get those powers back is to introduce new legislation. So the 2020 OIC list is effectively already behind legislation, which means they lied about why they wanted the G46 list in there. Which, I mean, we all... Surprise, the liberals lied about their gun control, you know? Shocker. But if this interpretation is correct, that actually really does just put the nail in that coffin. A lot of people, even a lot of moderates on the conversation, and even myself included, like I actually kind of believed them. You know, just because they lie a lot doesn't mean they lie all the time. Sometimes the truth does work in their favor. And for me, this seemed like a very believable story for why they wanted G46 in there. Not necessarily for what they were putting in G46, but why they wanted G46 in the law rather than just being a OIC'd list. But as it turns out, unless there's some other power that I don't know of, that was just another lie. Like, as far as I know, there's no other OIC powers in the Firearms Act or in the Criminal Code that could somehow work as a loophole or a workaround for all of this. This is actually one of the reasons why it's been like 3 weeks since I've uploaded. I've been looking and scouring and trying to find what I can about OICs and about various other powers for moving firearms classifications around, and I haven't really found any. There doesn't seem to be any other backdoors or loopholes that I'm unaware of that would make this easy for us going forwards. That being said, I can't be 100% sure that there are no other options. For example, I don't fully know how the OIC powers work. There is a great big list of all the OICs that get announced throughout Canada for all sorts of regulations and legislation and so on. For example, I did see a lot of people speculating online in various forums and stuff about the ability to rescind an OIC. So for example, rather than having to make a new OIC to bring everything back, some people were asking or speculating whether or not the OIC itself could just be rescinded, whether it could be sort of nullified and have these firearms just fall back into their natural categories. As far as I know, that's not a thing. An OIC isn't like a temporary action that exists only so long as the OIC is there. An OIC, or an order in council, an OIC is effectively as strong and as permanent as legislation. So I don't think that's how it works, but again, not a lawyer. Could be wrong. If anybody has good information on that, by all means put it down in the comments below. Let's get a conversation going. Maybe I'll have to make a third video correcting myself again, who knows? But not all hope is lost. For example, there are other powers regarding firearms classification that actually exist within the RCMP. Because the RCMP itself is actually who manages the firearms classification tables and the FRT and stuff like that. It's actually not technically the government. So the RCMP does have a lot of powers and a lot of leeway to move things up and down based on the laws, not based on their own individual, whims or anything like that. So there is a limit on what they can do, but they also do have a lot of authority to really make those decisions. So there might be some power that exists within the RCMP that I don't know of, that I'm not aware about. I don't think there is, but that might be an option. And then there's also the ongoing legal battles involving the CCFR and Canada. Currently, the CCFR is set to appeal their decision that they actually lost last year regarding the handgun freeze and the OICs, specifically the OICs, but they're also talking about like C-21 and the handgun freeze and a whole bunch of stuff. And like I've said before on the channel, I think they actually have a pretty good argument. I've been going over the court ruling and the decision, and I'm actually very surprised of the ruling that was handed down. Like I thought, I'll be making a video on this, but I thought the CCFR and I thought the other applicants combined, they just had a really good argument, and I think the judge showed some very significant bias and prejudice towards firearms owners with the ruling that was handed down. Hopefully their appeal goes better. I'm not expecting much. There's not a lot of sympathy for firearms owners in Canada these days, or really most places in the world even, but certainly in North America, certainly in Canada. So I'm not holding my breath, but the actual core legal argument is very strong. And if the judge treats us like they do any other Canadians, there's no good reason, there's no good justifiable reason for why they should hand down a negative ruling. But it's already happened once. It could very easily happen again. And at the end of the day, it's looking very likely that the Conservatives will win the next election with a significant majority unless something awful happens in the next year. And when they have that majority, they will have the ability to start introducing legislation to really fix all of this. And they have already said that they actually plan on kind of rebuilding the Firearms Act sort of from the ground up, really bring in better definitions, better classification systems. I don't know how far they're going to go with that. I think it's going to be more theatrics than a win in some sense. So I'm trying to curb my expectations, but they might surprise me. That'd be pretty sweet too. They will have to contend with the Senate, and the Senate is extremely liberalized, but there's not really any way to know how that's all going to go until it goes. I mean, it's entirely possible that Conservatives won't even win the next election, or they'll only get a minority. That's still quite a ways from now, so we'll have to see. We'll have to see how everything shakes out. But not all hope is lost. There's still options going forward, and like I said, our best option right now is probably the CCFR's court case. It was shocking to me reading that ruling that they got a negative ruling. Like, I honestly couldn't believe that. They were arguing a bunch of different points, and I don't think they should have won all of those points. But absolutely, on the OICs, the actual justification that the government of Canada used for the OICs was... I can't believe it. That's just... Yeah. So we'll see how the appeal goes. I'm going to be looking forward to that. And hopefully there'll be some good news, maybe even before the next election on that front. Because if the CCFR wins their court appeal, the judge can and will overturn the OICs, and then maybe we can breathe a sigh of relief. I don't personally have any of the guns on the OIC list, fortunately, but I know a lot of you guys probably do, and who knows, maybe you can go out with them to the range again before the end of the year. Wouldn't that be something, huh? That'd be crazy. So, I'd like to thank you guys all for watching. I'm sorry this video didn't really have any more conclusive information, and again, I am sorry for the mistake that I made, if I even made it, because like I say, I'm still not entirely sure. It really shouldn't be this complicated, but I'm pretty sure at least the OIC powers are gone. You can't take something from the prohibited list and OIC it back down to restricted or non-restricted. I don't think that's a thing anymore, but all I can do is correct it and move on. If you guys think I'm wrong about this, by all means, please put it in the comment section down below. And if you do comment, please put a link to the source or your evidence for why you think I'm wrong. That way I can learn more and educate myself more and put out more correct information in the future. Now I'm doing this video now because I'm actually finally about to do my part 2 for the C21 series. The C21 information itself, that's all solid. I mean, you can just take a look at C21 and it says, this law changed, this is now what it is. Like, it's very apples to apples, it's very organic, it's not open to any kind of interpretation or suggestion. So all of the information in my first C21 video, that's all basically solid regarding C21. But if you start looking at the information on the politics around it and the bureaucracy around it, that's where I get a little bit less accurate. So I got to do a better job on that in the future, and I got to start learning more about the bureaucracy and the sort of governmental structure and the legal structure. But I'll try to do better on that in the future. And I'm sorry I didn't have better news or more concrete information in this video. All that being said, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. That's also the other frustrating part about all this. Like, I'm making a good, solid effort here to really look into this stuff to the best of my ability. Like, I'm not dumb or anything, but I'm looking at this as hard as I can, and I just can't entirely figure everything out. It shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be this complicated. It is one of the big problems with Canadian gun laws. It's such a mess. Just everything's such a mess, and it's hard to really figure out, even if you're going at it with the best of intentions. It's honestly, it's difficult, and it just shouldn't be. There's no reason for it to be that complicated.